And my book is slowly going along at a reasonable pace. Lita Saki's been busy with that, and I'm enthusiastic. We'll go into the layout phase, hopefully within a month or so, maybe a little more. So that's good. But otherwise, let's go ahead and take the questions.
Okay. So there's only one question. So if someone has a question, just message me and let me know. And so Shama Sundar has a question.
Okay. I can. Good morning.
Could you repeat the question, because not everyone can hear what Shama Sundar is saying, especially on the recording, I think. Repeat it the best you can.
Yeah. Okay. Wait, should I do it now while he's saying it in Spanish, or wait for him to finish?
Yeah. You could do it now, I think.
Okay, he's asking about the idea that there's relativity to the guru and absolute. And it would seem like the philosophy is that once we accept that the guru is actually a conduit to connect us with the Godhead, that he actually or she actually has deep spiritual standing, that we've been able to ascertain that his or her faith is deep and ultimately driving him or her, then despite the fact that relatively he or she may have personality differences, idiosyncrasies, ways of dealing that we might not, or that even culturally speaking might seem embarrassing to us of one culture when the guru is from another culture and speaks. And he gave the example of Prabhupada sometimes speaking with reporters, and you kind of wish he would have said it differently, or something like that. He gave the example of Bhaktisiddhanta adopting certain things, relatively speaking, for the sake of preaching, like wearing leather shoes, which many disciples might have thought, oh my God, he's wearing leather shoes. This is terrible, Or to make a more extreme example, at one point he said, I was prepared to serve meat to the Western, people, leaders, let's say, British, to have them come to Mayapur and hear, Harikatha from him and so forth. And this was staggering to the faith of Pujapad Sridhar Maharaj. He confessed, and to Prabhupada as well, at least initially. Whoa. But they nonetheless embraced the absolute and saw what Bhaktisiddhanta was doing in terms of the larger picture. And thus they were able to digest that and so forth. So his question is about that, and he made the point that, well, it can't go the other way around. In other words, it should go because the guru is spiritual, has spiritual standing, and despite the fact that, relatively speaking, he may say or do, or his idiosyncrasies may be such that there are times disconcerting to the disciple, that should be seen as relative, and the absolute consideration should take precedence. And he said in his question that conversely, it's not going to work out, that the guru has to conform to all the relative sensibilities of the disciples in order for them to have faith in him. That's obviously not going to work. But then he gave some extreme examples of gurus. There were some gurus in ISKCON that were, after Prabhupada's departure, who were doing some very unsavory things. They were robbing stores, having disciples rob gas stations, and one of them anyway, and shooting guns at liquor stores and the weird things. I don't know all the details, but those are a couple things that I've heard. And so what about that? So he asked me anyway to speak about that. And I think that, his question in itself really largely answers the question as he reasoned about it. But the examples that Sean brings up that are extreme are obviously, another thing altogether. So, what constitutes Vaishnava achar, the proper behavior of a disciple, of a guru, is more of a broader category than it is a fine, detailed determination that's going to conform with whatever it is, political correctness, psychological insights of the modern day, what may be good but relative, and so on and so forth. That's one thing, but he or she is obviously doing something extraordinary, for example, as in the case of Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, and then saying he would serve meat. Well, you have to put the two together. If he's not doing anything extraordinary and made a comment like that, or ate meat himself, then it would be rather an extreme, I think. And so we have to use some common sense. And we've got others to speak with, consult with. We've got examples, precedents over the history of the Sampradaya. And we've got a very important statement, I believe it's cited in Chaitanya Charitamrita. I'm not sure of the origin of it, but Vaishnavara Kriya Mudra Vignana Bhujaya. So it's difficult to understand the Vaishnava, his heart, his or her heart motivation. And the classic example, or one of them, is of course that of Pundarik Vidyanidhi, who was misunderstood externally by Gadadhar Pandit. But when Mukunda cited some verses that caused him to go into bhava, it was apparent that he was very deep. I mean, there's even a statement in Chaitanya Charitamrita, in Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, in the section about Bhava Bhakti, that one in Bhava Bhakti may show some blemishes or do something untoward or that is out of character and so forth. But that should be dismissed in light of the greater reality of his or her absorption. Perhaps we could cite Maharaj Parikshit as an example. What he did, losing his temper, garlanding the sage with a snake, a dead snake, because the sage did not greet him, honor him properly. He is the emperor. How the heck did that happen? It's out of character for Maharaj Parikshit, but he did it. So we can judge him by that, or we can judge him further, and should, by the fact that he then proceeded to fast from food and drink, and listen to the Bhagavatam with rapt attention, which then illustrates that he had another internal reality that was more substantial than the superficial and external behavior in that incident. Of course, we can say Krishna was behind it, and that caused the Bhagavatam to be spoken, and so on and so forth. I mean, you can look at it in that way, or it can just be, as I say, citing, as I have Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, every guru is going to have his or her humanness, idiosyncrasies. They may forget things. Prabhupada quoted wrong verses, sometimes half of one verse, half of another. I saw Prabhupada fall asleep during kirtan more than once. In the morning, we would have kirtan. We would have Bhagavatam. He would rise early in the morning, and I mean, I think it would take rest around 10. He would get up around 1. I mentioned once before that I had the opportunity once in Krishna Balaram Temple to be staying in a room that had a window to the balcony of Prabhupada's quarters. And so I got up in the middle of the night to answer the call of nature, and there through the window I saw Prabhupada translating. It was like 1 in the morning, 1:30 in the morning. And so I just stayed up all night and watched him. But that was, as far as I could tell, typically his schedule. And then by sometimes he would walk and pace a little bit and chant, sit, and by about 6:15 in the morning, he would go for a walk, right? And so he's been up since 1 in the morning. He'd go for a walk. I was blessed to go on a number of those walks. Then he would return to the temple, especially in the early days in Los Angeles. It's very charming and endearing times for me to recall. When I see films now of those times and the devotees, it's just so endearing. I know them all. I knew they were in their swarups of that time, their bhakti swarups, if you will, fully absorbed in service. I always think of them, in light of that time. So anyway, then Prabhupada would come into the temple, pay his respects to the deities, the different altars, come sit on the asana, chant, and give class, and after the class they'd chant again. So a couple of times during either of those chantings, earlier or later, I saw him nod off a little bit. I just thought, well, I guess he's tired. He's been up since 1 in the morning, early. So, but someone could say, what's this? The guru is falling asleep during chanting. Obviously, he has not attained Nishta. So, there's that. So, and I think that, also I think that if we take the time to really try to understand Sri Guru personally, if we have the opportunity, and in doing so, we can take advice from those who know him very well, or her very well, have lived with her over the years, and so on and so forth. we can grow in terms of our love for the person of the guru. If we think how, there's really nothing in this here. I mean, preaching is a thankless task, Prabhupada used to say. There is something I should say. I mean, it's a difficult task. It's often the extent to which the guru puts out, that I put out, this is my experience for my disciples, being patient with them, compassionate with them, overlooking things that they have done. My concern is always somehow or other to keep them connected in the ballpark of Krishna consciousness, despite so many distractions that they have, even things that they do that are unpleasant and even bordering on, being offensive at times. It's happened over the years. The extent to which I feel for them and wait for them and compassionately try to help them, it's often not, reciprocated back in kind. I don't get the same type of, but that's the job, if you will. So, and it's just part of the territory. But over time, I think that devotees will feel that about their guru, and that will override relative concerns, to the point that even relative concerns and idiosyncrasies of the guru will turn into something charming rather than problematic. The relative will turn into something charming, and it might be a problem for some outside person, but for one who has love for the guru and knows him or her, then the problem will resolve. Indeed, the relative becomes part of the absolute. That becomes another problem. Because I've told the story before how Tamala Krishna Maharaj told me that when you would ask Prabhupada a question, yes or no, he'd say no and shake his head back and forth, if you can watch me, which in the Western culture means, if he'd say yes, he would move his head like this, yes, 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 yes. Instead of yes, 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 up and down, he would move it back and forth. So Tamala Krishna Maharaj told me that he thought that the spiritual way to say yes, rather than the material way, was to move, horizontally. The material way was to move your head up and down. So that's where it kind of goes to, an extreme, and it becomes a little silly. But he said, but then when they went to India, and I saw everybody goes like that, it moves their head left to right when saying yes. Then I realized it was, somewhat relative, although we never used terms like that in relation to Prabhupada. We never used the term relative and absolute. That's something Guru Maharaj, Pujapad Sridhar Maharaj, way in which he used to talk about it, which is very enlightening and insightful, and hence, the question. But there is, a bit of a balancing act that we may have to do in some instances, and our own idiosyncrasies can get in the way, our own misconceptions, our own ego. So, we do have to be careful about that. So, those are some thoughts on it. I mean, again, the extremes that you mentioned, robbing grocery stores and things like that. Well, that's another thing, right? But idiosyncrasies of the personality, forgetting things, saying it one way one time, one way another time. He or she may not even be paying attention to the extent that we think he or she is to the immediate concerns of ourselves and so forth. I saw Prabhupada repeatedly do what I would call wrestle himself down from another plane to deal with relative things that in the broader picture don't have a lot to do with self-realization and controlling the mind, the senses, and expressing oneself heartfully in bhakti, but were important because of relative considerations in the world, the condition of the disciples and so forth. But he would wrestle himself down to deal with it. And sometimes he was very, very brief. And he said things like, for example, when Vishnu Jan Maharaj was a famous sannyasi disciple of Prabhupada, when I was the last person to speak with him on the roof in the building of Mayapur, before he disappeared that same day. And where he had gone was in question for some time. And then some other disciples put together some evidence to make a convincing case that he had hired a boatman and out into the Ganga, and he had committed suicide. And there's a whole background to that. That morning early, we were walking on the roof with Prabhupada, and he had asked Prabhupada a certain question. He had asked a question: if a sannyasi should fall down, you've given the example of Chota Haridas, or the example of Chota Haridas is there in the Chaitanya Charitamrita. And he was living with widows, or not living with widows. He approached a widower who was actually a great devotee, and had begged rice from her. And Mahaprabhu then refused to see him because he was a sannyasi interacting with a widow, and he was in his Acharya-lila and setting a very extreme or strong example. So he rejected Chota Haridas. And I think maybe in his purport there, Prabhupada said, and so, if the sannyasi deviates like this, then, he should commit suicide. That's what Chota Haridas did. And in doing so, Mahaprabhu, his mercy came to him, appeared to him after his suicide, and so on. So Vishnu Jan, maybe he had some slip up somewhere along the line. It may have been something that he just exaggerated in his mind, because he was quite a nice devotee with good character. But anyway, he apparently did that. So later, it was sometime later that Prabhupada was told that Vishnu Jan Maharaj had committed suicide. And Prabhupada said, what can I do if he doesn't want to serve? That's all he said. Sounds very harsh, very like, whoa, imagine if I said that. It'd be an explosion, but we just digested it. And we knew that Prabhupada loved Vishnu Jan Maharaj, but he responded in that way. I mean, again, he's on another plane. He's absorptionist somewhere else. He comes down to deal with it in the world where we are, where certain things are more important than to us than they may be in the larger picture. But I give you an example like that. That sounds shocking to you, perhaps, how he responded. But I have no doubt that Prabhupada loved Vishnu Jan Maharaj, and exactly why he said that what maybe example he was trying to show us, I don't know, or just the fact that, he was half somewhere else at the time and not as plugged into it as some of the other students were. We thought he should be. It's not our position to decide how absorbed he should be in any particular aspect of the mission and the relativity that is shows its face there and so forth. But we try to do both. Obviously, tend to the relative concerns of the disciples, set a good example, and that largely, of course, means with regard to the actual practice that we're teaching, an example of that, good moral character and so forth. So those are some thoughts. It's a large topic that's come up, a number of times over the years, because it was quite revolutionary to hear the relative and absolute of the Guru from Pujapad Sridhar Maharaj, when previously, we only heard the Guru's absolute. And so, to sometimes bring up, well, Prabhupada is saying this, it's relative, and this is the teaching, it's the absolute, and it's been a minefield to navigate, if you will, especially with Prabhupada's disciples, some of whom it's taken me years to gradually bring them into to resolve these types of things, even with Prabhupada. Prabhupada said this, and just resolve or shed light on the whole idea that there's a relative and there's an absolute side to the guru. It's taken me years. It's very difficult to do that. It's very difficult to build faith. It's very easy to tear it down. And that should be considered. So I hope that helps. Shyam, any further questions? Okay, good. It was well stated question, I think, and I think, as I said, the answer lied in the question as you presented it itself. I only tried to elaborate upon it. But yeah, and Sridhar Maharaj also did some odd things. I remember once, if I may continue, just a thought comes to mind. Bhakti Pramod Puri Goswami Maharaj had two sannyasi disciples, Bodhayan Maharaj and Bhagavad Maharaj. And Bhagavad Maharaj was from a Brahmin family, and from a Varnashram point of view, he was from a higher Brahmin family than Puri Goswami Maharaj. Bodhayan Maharaj was not from a Brahmin family. Quite sure he was from a Vaishya family. Bhagavad Maharaj was very learned and a very good speaker and a very good kind of a person to be like a successor, to carry on and represent the teaching. He was quite good. And Puri Maharaj sent him even to Vrindavan to learn the different darshans, darshan, and different forms of Vedanta and so forth. So he was taking advantage of his learnedness and so forth. And Bodhayan Maharaj, by contrast, was simply serving Puri Goswami Maharaj day and night. Who, bedridden. He was over 100 years old at that time. And I once mentioned a verse from Bhakti Sindhu. We said, yeah, I never read that book. So he was not studied at all, comparatively, at all. But Puri Maharaj chose him as his successor over Bhagavad Maharaj. And Bhagavad Maharaj was took exception to this, because he was from a higher Brahmin family. Even of Puri Maharaj, what to speak of, Bodhayan Maharaj. And Brahmins are the teachers. So if you're within Vaishnavism and you have a Brahmin as well, that's kind of the first choice or direction you look at for someone to represent you in some of the terms of the teaching. So he argued with Puri Maharaj, and Puri Maharaj wouldn't give in. And he told him, bhakti is more important than gyan. You have knowledge, but Bodhayan Maharaj has more bhakti, even though he doesn't have the knowledge that you have. And well, I'm kind of off on a tangent here, but Bhagavad Maharaj couldn't accept it, and he was told to leave the month. His ego, got the best of him. He saw himself as more qualified than he was. But the reason I bring that up, it gets a bit of a tangent, but Bhagavad Maharaj, who was very particular about how everything should be done, all the proper, procedures and everything. He's very like nitty, very concerned with. I mean, there had to be a certain pot that you would piss in from a certain direction, and you had, I went through this with him, and I just chuckled, at it. This is all important, very important to him. All these things. And they're all there in the scriptures, right? But it was getting in the way of the real substance of the whole thing. Bhavagrahi Janardana, but Krishna accepts the spirit of the service, even if the service is done technically and mechanically wrong and so forth. So that, reality, I mean, he could voice that, he could understand that, he could even teach that, but he couldn't, when it came to practice, his other sensibilities took precedence. So anyway, long story short, I once, in this regard, I once told him that I watched Pujapat Sridhar Maharaj, who was from a higher Brahmin family than Bhagavad Maharaj, chanting japa with his japa beads in his rocking chair and eating muri, which is like puffed rice with peanuts, with his left hand, popping it into his mouth as he chanted with his right. And he just about fainted, Bhagavad Maharaj. How could he possibly, it sounds like a simple thing because we love Sridhar Maharaj. I don't care if he ate with his feet, it wouldn't matter to me, but for him, it was like a big thing, like, oh my God, how could he possibly, do that? So I had to chuckle, try to give him a bigger picture of me, the malecha. But it didn't bode well for him ultimately, as the relative got the upper hand, took precedence over the absolute. And Bodhayana Maharaj is not learned today, that still comparatively, but he is carrying on the mission of his Guru Maharaj and around the world, and succeeding him in a way that he so desired. So anyway, I just brought it up because that's an example of Sridhar Maharaj also acting out of character, or what you think the character might be or should be. There are other things he did too. I mean, he sometimes used to beat Govinda Maharaj, who was his, successor. And Govinda Maharaj used to say that he asked him, could you do that inside the room so others won't see? So they won't think ill of you. I don't. You're beating me. But others may think, it's a little, Guru Maharaj getting a little angry here, it's a little unfair. All he did was this. But anyway, so yeah, those things are there. So yeah, what it means for the Guru to be an example of good behavior and so forth. There's a little bit of relativity to that. And it's not, the disciple's not entirely the judge and the court and the jury, on that. Vaishnava, again, Kriyamudra Bhigni Nabujai. So to understand the heart of the Vaishnava, that's not easy to do. May misunderstand his or her behavior. We're cautioned about that. Bhakti, the Upadeshamrita tells us the same thing. There are a lot of things floating in the Ganga, but the Ganga is pure. Don't think otherwise. That example is given with regard to the Guru or advanced devotees who may have physical defects, or even mentally they may conduct themselves in ways that seem inappropriate to us. It's possible. So long answer there. Forgive me but it's good. I appreciate the question. Are there any other questions?
I saw a comment in the chat. I don't know if Ganga Shakti had a previous question from a call. I haven't asked her. I just saw Sharada writing that. Yeah. Okay, I'm not hearing anything from her. Yeah, does anyone have a question?
Amrita Gopal here has a question, if possible. It is possible. Amrita Gopal. Kijai. Amrita Gopal. Where are you from? I don't think we've met. Nice to meet you.
Hare Krishna Maharaj. We met a few times here.
Oh, there you are. Yes, now I
Yes.
understand.
I just want to say I'm so appreciative of your very wonderful answer. I did have a question. it was totally unrelated to the spiritual aspect that you gleaned from the last question. But I just want to say thank you. Unfortunately, I'm in a very embarrassing situation where I'm completely drowning in material existence. And my question actually was, how can I overcome the fear that I feel when I'm around materialistic people? That's what I'd like to concentrate on. If you could provide some insight into that.
Well, thank you. And my heart goes out to you to see your reaction to the answer to my question, and with regard to your the way you depicted your own situation. I don't think you're as bad off as you think. Grounding in material existence. Well, that's a good way for a disciple to think, and relatively speaking, I think it's accurate. But you have Guru, Vaishnav, who care about you, and that's what's important. If they care about us, then our life is successful. We should, yes, go ahead, yeah. We should be concerned, and this should be our concern in general, that our guru, that what we do, how we think, that what was my point? That they will, that someone of spiritual consequence cares about us. That should be our concern. And if we have that confidence, which in your case you should, and all of us in the Sangha should, then we should feel that we are like Abhay Charan, fearless, at the feet of Krishna, through the connection with a Vaishnava, with a Guru who cares about us. Krishna cares about us. Out of millions of jivas, he cares about them all, but now in a particular way, because someone who loves him and has demonstrated that over, long period of time, has spoken for that person. Well, Krishna has to take notice that's love psychology. If you love someone and then they say, I love this person too, or then they're naturally going to be disposed towards them. So that puts us in we're a marked person then. We're on Krishna's list, so to speak. So that's not going to be erased. Even if we try to erase it, well, it's indelible. So it may be covered over, but it'll come back in due course. So you're in a good position. And we all have difficulty with our daily practice and so forth. It's not an easy thing. There are all types of obstacles that come, obstacles from our past that have not yet been dealt with sufficiently, remnants of prarabdha karma and so forth. And then there's the world. We don't live in West Bengal, in 200 years ago or 100 years ago. We live here in Brighton or London or Warsaw, or wherever it is, San Francisco, Buenos Aires, and it's and people think differently. They're materialistic people. They're moving like robotically for the most part. And now your question is, well, how can I overcome the fear of materialistic people? Well, one way in which I would respond to that is, it was the only fear of Prahlad Maharaj to be associated with people that weren't devotees. So it's a healthy fear. In a sense, it's a healthy fear. But if we reflect on what I said earlier, what our position is, regardless of our standing in the ladder of bhakti and its progress from Shraddha to Prem, we have standing, period. We have a sadhaka deha. We've been given a practitioner's body by our guru, and it's not entirely perfected. Sometimes it's used materially, sometimes it's used spiritually, but the sadhaka is different than a bada jiva, than an eternally conditioned jiva, different than a mukta also. But it's a very glorious position to be in. And so we should have confidence in that, confidence that our gurus care about us and the other Vaishnavas and so forth. And so, with a healthy fear of materialistic people, that we shouldn't become neurotic about it, but based on understanding of the strength that we have, if we understand in terms of our connection, we should have confidence in that. We don't need to have confidence in ourselves. We shouldn't. We're weak. But Krishna is strong, and Krishna is kind, generous, merciful. So we should have confidence in that. Ashabandha, hope beyond hope. I have no hope in myself, but I have hope nonetheless, because Krishna is the way he is. I've heard about that. I've seen it in the lives of others. So therefore, I should be able to interact with people in a way that while having a healthy concern about not being drawn in, by their conceptions, habits, and so forth, I should feel strong enough to interact with them in ways that are necessary for my particular lifestyle, and in ways that, to some extent at least, will set an example that I can become a positive in their lives rather than they becoming a negative in my life. And again, I think that despite our shortcomings as a practitioner, which are glaring at times, we have to reflect on the patience, compassion of our gurus, the nature of Krishna, the stories of Krishna's kindness, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's kindness. This is what we're connected with. Be kind with one another, be generous with one another, be generous with me too. I need your generosity. I have many faults, many shortcomings. This is a way, I think, to think about the issue that you raised. I hope that helps. Yeah. Okay. Haribol. Who else is there in the Brighton setting?
So we have Amrita Gopal, Sri Radha, we have Sharad Prabhu, we've got Dr. Rob Prabhu, and Madana Mohan. Small Sangha today, smaller than last week.
Okay. Small is beautiful. Okay, so let's see. We don't have any other questions on the in the chat, but if anyone has one.
Guru Maharaj, pranams. It's Omkar.
Omkar, there he is. Okay.
Can you hear me? Sorry about the bad light. Maybe you can't see it properly.
I can see you. Yes, I see you in a brighter light than you are standing in.
I kind of would like to segue with a little bit of a comment and a question also. I've been wondering about associating with people not directly, out of the Prakriti realm, more materialistic people. Somebody was saying that I shouldn't associate with tamasic people in general. And me and Sham Sundar were talking about yesterday. And I was wondering, he asked me, what is tamasic person anyway? And I couldn't even produce an answer to him. So I don't really know what a tamasic person would even be. I mean, my dad's pretty tamasic and he wants to hang out with me and talking about eating steak. So I don't know. It sounds rough but it is, at the same time, he's my dad. So I'm thinking.
Well, I think that there are symptoms of those who are influenced by tamaguna, rajaguna, and sattvaguna given in the Gita, Bhagavad Gita. And I believe you'll find the same thing in the Uddhava Gita, where Krishna speaks to Uddhava in a very similar way that he spoke to Arjuna. The difference being that Uddhava was a Brahmin and by caste, and Arjuna was a warrior. So the setting is different and so forth. But, you can look there for those symptoms. And to the extent that they are predominant in a person, they could be labeled in terms of their material condition as tamasic, rajasic, or sattvic in nature. I mean, most people in the world are driven by rajaguna and tamaguna. That's what makes the world go round. Sattvaguna starts to slow the world down and move one in the opposite direction. Because with sattva, the symptom of sattva, of course, is knowledge. And the fullest measure of that knowledge is knowing the difference between consciousness and matter, even experientially, what to speak of theoretically. And happiness also is a characteristic of sattva, a kind of inner happiness that is not based on the ups and downs of everyday life, the gains and the losses and so forth. So, there's few people that are sattvic in nature. The world is driven by rajas and tamas. Sattva will start to bring an end to it, move it in the opposite direction. So to associate with ordinary people, well, you're going to associate with rajasic and tamasic people. Probably someone who told you that was talking about, I can just, make a conjecture, people who take drugs and, are tamasic in that respect, in the extreme. I don't know about yourself, but a lot of devotees come from a background of, myself included, experiments with in the counterculture in my youth with different substances and so on and so forth. So, maybe someone who talked to you about tamasic people was, thinking along that, knowing that you yourself may have those influences and those, the leaning towards intoxication is pretty strong. Most people drink, even in the higher so-called circles of society. So anyway, I don't know what exactly they were referring to. You give the example of your father. Okay, well, you should, relatively speaking, you should love your father and your mother. You should obey your father and mother, relatively speaking, right? So you have to look at that in light of the absolute, and the fact that your father eats meat, well, it's a given. You guys just have to tell him, look, I don't eat meat, so it's better you don't bring that up with me, and I don't want to get into an argument with you, Dad, about it or anything like that. You have your habits, I have mine, and this is just one where we don't agree on. Let's do something else. Let's talk about something else. It's good to have a good relationship with your parents. I think that would be good for them if they can come to appreciate you in despite the fact that you are conducting yourself in a way that doesn't correspond with what they think is productive, valuable, makes sense, and so forth. I think that if you can have a relationship with people like that in such a way over time that they just appreciate you, then they can, in a kind of related sense, appreciate what you're doing. It takes time. Parents love their kids usually, for the most part. And so the fact that their kids do something or take up a lifestyle that is not one that they would choose, or they don't understand, they don't think is right, it doesn't have to be a cause of distancing themselves entirely from one another. So I think there's a way to bridge that gap, keep a relationship, and emphasize the things that are important to them. I'm your son, I know I'm different, I'm your son, but I love you, and I'm here, whatever, just to be with you because you're my dad, and I don't know, I didn't have the chance to do this with my father, but this is what I would do. I remember things that we did when we were young and when I was younger, and the things that that he did do that endear me to him, and I would not bring up the things that he did that didn't endear me to him. And then he said, "Well, my son, yeah, he's a Hare Krishna, but whatever. I guess they aren't that bad. It's okay." That then becomes not that bad of a thing. I know for my own father, we were alienated, and he didn't like the idea that I became a Hare Krishna. He disowned me, wrote me out of the will on account of that. Not against me, but he wouldn't give any money to the Hare Krishnas, that was for sure. So, but he used to, in his business, travel, and he would meet devotees in airports selling books. And they would sell him a book. He said, "Oh, my son's involved in this." And then it would come out, it was Tripurari, and then they would go like, "Oh," they'd like pay their obeisances to my father or something, because he's famous, "Oh my God," and "You're his father," And so, and so my father liked that, I heard later from my mother, he said, "Well, at least he's, he's successful in his field, he's become very successful." And then I had one conversation with him before he passed away over the phone, and my mother told me this after. He said, "He's of all my sons, he can really articulate himself very well." So there were some redeeming things, I guess, that he found in me, despite my religious spiritual persuasion. And so, there's a way to navigate the course. And I wouldn't take the statement from some devotees, "Don't associate with tamasic people," to an extreme like that. There's things to learn from ordinary people. So we live sometimes in a bit of a bubble, thinking we know everything and everybody's in Maya, but we're in Maya too. And there's things we can learn from ordinary people. We can learn from everybody. Even from the inanimate world, there's things to learn if we want to learn. So hope that helps.
Yeah, thank you. That's very nice, as usual.
Hare Krishna. You're
Hare
nice.
Krishna.
You're nice too. Yeah. Okay, so we're just got a few minutes, but the audience is not full of questions, so.
John had a question if there was time. He messaged me.
Harjan Das, yes, Harjan.
Dandavats Maharaj. And thank you for the.
Yeah.
Yes.
Oh, you said yes.
Thank you. That was a wonderful, wonderful last answer you gave. My particular question was, in the Bhagavad Gita, at the very beginning of Krishna's teachings to Arjuna, he says, "Najayate mriyate va kadachin." There is no birth for the true self, for true nature like that. And at the same time, we very naturally and spontaneously speak about rebirth to the extent of even, you mentioned, I think it was last week or a couple of weeks ago, you said one takes birth in the prakata-lila of the Lord before going to the aprakat dimension. So how would we kind of harmonize those two principles?
Well, yeah, I think that the Gita is talking about the fact that the Atma has no birth. It has no beginning.
Right.
The body is taking birth. The Atma is along for the ride, but it's not taking birth. At the beginning of the Atma, and death is not the end of the Atma. So that's really what the Gita is emphasizing. The biological reality of birth is independent, in one sense, of the Atma, although it corresponds with the Atma's extension of consciousness, material absorption, and so on and so forth. So it's just a basic distinguishing there in the Gita between the consciousness in matter, if you will. Of course, taking birth in the prakata-lila, that is there is a birth to bhakti, sadhasanga, that gives rise to bhakti within us. So, but taking birth in the prakata-lila, that's a good idea. That's another thing. I think that we say that bhakti has the power to change, prarabdha karma, manifest karma, whereas knowledge, transcendental knowledge, does, in comparison, does not. I say transcendental knowledge, but it's sattva guna. And one of the examples of that I give is that, well, you have a certain father or mother, that's not going to change. That's your prarabdha karma. So how are you going to change that? Right? Mm-hmm. How can bhakti change that? Mm-hmm. We say that bhakti can change that, because in bhakti, it will give you another father and another mother. Mm-hmm. In a prakata-lila. That in bhava bhakti, internally, one will meditate on and cultivate and so forth, such that it results in taking birth in the prakata-lila. Then you have another gopa father, gopi mother, and so on and so forth. So your prarabdha karma has changed in terms of who your father and mother is, if you will, in bhava bhakti, by the power, the force of bhakti. But that's a little getting away from your question. It's an interesting topic. But again, the Atma is only realizing, as Baladev says, Baladev Vijayabhushan, its own inherent bliss in conjunction with the blessing of God that's been bestowed on it. So there's no origin to it. The mother and father, the Swarup is eternal, like the Atma is eternal. So
I guess I could rephrase slightly and ask, if there's no birth for the true self, that which is actually alive and can experience anything at all, then what is it exactly which takes birth in prakata-lila, let's say?
Well, look at it like this. There's no material birth. There's a spiritual birth.
Okay. Okay.
Born into the lila, into lila sepa. It's a different thing altogether. And that, again, that form is eternal. So it doesn't have a beginning either. Part of you. You prosper. So try to go there, right?
Okay. Thank you.
I see we have a couple other questions in Spanish. Reverencias Maharaj quisiera preguntar, okay, ¿cómo lidar con las expectativas y better ask Shyam for a translation of that when I can't read Spanish these days. Well, I mean, you're asking a question that I can understand affects a lot of devotees. But, well, take, for example, myself. I became a devotee All right. That was not the expectation of my father of me by any stretch of the imagination. I mean, that was like probably devastating to him. And what he had in mind for me was devastating for me. So we are other individuals. Now I became a devotee, so that issue was there, right? But my brother became a fisherman in Alaska, and that flipped my father out as well. What my father expected of him was entirely different, and he was devastated by the idea that my brother wanted to do that, and my brother was devastated by the idea of what my father wanted to do. So it's not something that's just relative to becoming a devotee. It happens all the time, and perhaps not as much in some third world countries like Latin America, Eastern Europe, perhaps, or in Asia, but in modern, more industrialized nations, not that the world isn't industrialized, not that Latin America isn't, but they're more industrialized, more technologically developed, and there's more money, and so there's more options. As the society, the culture becomes more wealthy in a materialistic society, well, it seems that what is pursued and presented as the goal is to have more and more opportunities, more and more freedoms of choice and opportunities, and so forth. So when that happens, well, then the more traditional idea, that the traditional idea was you'd have children to help you run the farm. You need some hands, let's try for a daughter this time, because we need to train her to another cook on the team here. Hope for a boy this time, because I need someone to help me with the cattle. This was typical, and so the family unit was very much united, stayed together. The expectations of the parents were fulfilled, and it would be very much of an exception for a son or a daughter to go in some other direction. Or, later as society developed and moved away from agrarian-based society, there would be, we need a doctor. We need a lawyer. Okay. So you can find Indian families like that. They want the son to become a doctor because they want free medical treatment in their old age. They want the son to be a doctor, and that's the payment. We brought you into this world, we've raised you up, and this is the payoff, So there's like a working relationship here. Or we want a lawyer, maybe a judge, politician. Let's try for this. So that this would be part of the calculation. This one will be a lawyer. This one will be a doctor. This one will be something else. And so, but with the development of the industrial society, we move away from this more and more, and so it's not uncommon that children disappoint their parents on some level. And then you get the parents who are just like, well, if it makes you happy, it's good. That's kind of like, okay, well, that's works in a modern society. But, then again, to become a devotee may be too extreme for them to say, well, if it makes you happy, okay. And how to deal with those pressures? Well, you have to stay the course, and you have to be patient. And you have to think how your guru is being patient with you. You have to be patient with your parents. As you grow older, your parents become your children. That's just a fact. You're the children. You become friends. From a parental relationship, you're the children, they're the parents. Then it becomes friends. Then you become the parents, and they become the children. Now I'm becoming a child at my age. I'm becoming a child. You are supposed to become my parents and take care of me, despite my bad qualities. You have to have patience with me, like I have had patience with you for so long. So I'm not sure who asked the question here, how old you are, and it may be a little premature for you to be looking at that way. A lot of your parents, or they may not be relating with you like that, but I'm just speaking in general. So have patience, stay the course of bhakti, and as I was saying to Omkar, you know, try to like put out of their picture a little bit, you know, the fact that your lifestyle, your values are different than theirs. There are other things that you agree with on them that you can come together on, emphasize those things, and just the fact that you're their children. You don't want to displease them, but you know, you have convictions, and you know, there's gonna be some friction. You know, but you have to have confidence that over time they'll be amending. So don't let the immediate pressure burden you too much. Have a broader picture. In time, it will go away. If you conduct yourself in ways that I've suggested, it will go away. And they'll have more acceptance of you over time, especially if you actually advance Krishna consciousness and develop good character and so forth. Oh, this is from Wendy Alvarado. Okay, glad I could be helpful. She says, Jai, muchísimas gracias, and de nada. Okay, so that's good. We went a little over time even. Thank you for all your questions. Good company, and I hope to be with you next week. Shri Guru Gauranga ki jai, or Bhaktivinoda ki jai, Gaur Premanande, Jai Gaur, Jai Nitai.
Thank you, Gurudev. Okay, so I'm going to do some announcements.